Hello, I'm Valerie Lemmie, and I'm very pleased to participate in the Frontiers of Democracy conference. I only wish I could be there with you in person. This is my first experience with a video presentation, so I'm going to be hopefully excused for moving my head and my body and being a little bit nervous. It's not often that public administrators have their words immortalized in film. But I am hoping that you're having a wonderful conference. I will miss participating in the discussions and learning from all of you, your experiences and your views about how we can maintain and enhance our democracy. I'd like to share with you my experiences as city manager and how those experiences brought me to the belief that the way we move forward as a country in the future is really through citizen engagement. In fact, I believe engagement of citizens in the governance process is so important that we should add it to the pillars of public administration along with economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. I've had the opportunity to work at all three levels of government: local government, state, and federal. And I have been able to observe how those organizations institutionalize citizen involvement, and I've been able to observe how citizens responded to those institutions. Levels of frustration and distrust exist today, and they're the highest levels that I've seen in my nearly 30-year career. I'm really amazed at the anger that people are displaying in the context of our governmental organizations. They feel impotent when it comes to politics. They feel pushed out of the political process, and they're frustrated that government doesn't address the problems that matter to them. But guess what? Citizens are not alone in their frustration. Public officials are frustrated as well. The problem I see is a structural one. Our public institutions are out of sync with the citizens they are to represent and serve. To address this structural disconnect, I believe it is time for a transformational change in how public institutions lead, manage, and interact with citizens. The bottom line is that we need to find a way to involve citizens in public work. We must move beyond treating citizens as customers and acting on their behalf. There's an increased level of citizen activism born out of their disgust and frustration. The Take Back Wall Street movement, the Tea Party movement are examples. Others are spearheading changes through legislation, referenda, and still others are coming to meetings and expressing their frustration vociferously and loudly. But I believe public institutions should tap into this emerging civic renewal movement and invite citizens back to the public square. So let's talk about how I think we can create an environment of shared work or co-production. Whether we term the process deliberative democracy, citizen engagement, or complementary production, the key is that government and citizens work together to fix wicked problems, the problems that vex and frustrate citizens. While there's some promising efforts underway at the federal level, notably EPA, and at the state level, with departments of natural resources and extension services, local government is closest to the citizens. So I think this is a good place to start. And the first order of business is changing the systems that are undergirding the governmental institutions at the local level. The strategies, the structures, the way government works in order to institutionalize shared work. We've got to make space for that. And if we don't institutionalize it, it will be the flavor of the month, and the next person who's in charge will go to a different flavor and do something different. And I really believe that it is time for us to engage citizens in the governance process in local government. Elected officials and professional administrators bring organizational and managerial expertise, but citizens bring context, experience, and passion. Both are necessary if we're going to be able to sustain our communities, have faith and trust in government, and have a government that is responsive to citizens and ones where citizens believe that they are there to support and help and serve them. The most important lesson I learned as a city manager was that I had to step outside City Hall and to work with the community and citizens and other institutional partners if I really wanted to have something done that was going to be sustained over time, move beyond just a Band-Aid fix. While I was responsible for the day-to-day operations of city government, my job description had to change. I had to add community coordinator and liaison to my list of responsibilities. In order to find the time to take on these new responsibilities, I had to make certain organizational changes to ensure performance didn't lag. City managers are hired to ensure governmental operations function properly, efficiently, effectively, and economically. And that had to be done. But in order to find the time to add that new set of responsibilities, I had to do something different. And what I did was give everyone a promotion. The assistant city managers and department heads and I would work to do more of the leadership work of the organization. And we would try to help the public find their voice. Division level supervisors would take on more managerial responsibilities and work with citizens on how to design strategies and systems of shared work. Once professionals step outside City Hall, they quickly discover that issues that matter to citizens go beyond the breadth of a single public organization. As city manager, I had to learn to navigate the myriad governmental and judicial organizations that needed to be included in the deliberative process. I also had to become the bridge that brought the right players to the table to work with government and citizens. I lastly had to learn how to create a more citizen-directed environment without alienating elected officials. Most elected officials see themselves as representing citizens, and they believe that they are the person that city staff ought to talk to about issues. They should not be going directly to citizens because they are the citizen representatives. They jealously guard their relationship with the public from city staff. They define the role of citizen as mainly a passive one, voting, writing letters to the editor, volunteering to serve on boards and commissions, attending public hearings or town meetings in order to be briefed by the elected officials on the work being done on their behalf. Stepping outside City Hall can be seen as tantamount to campaigning against incumbents. So the city manager has to create ways for them to benefit when city staff work directly with citizens. They must view as elected officials the relationship as an expansion of their political power, not a sharing of power necessarily, but an expansion of their power when you bring more people to the table and include citizens in the governance process. Your argument can be that you have enlarged the power base of the elected official. Examples of how to do this include the use of their bully pulpit to promote shared work at a community meeting or conferences before their peers like the National League of Cities. Work on ways to reduce barriers that make it harder to collaborate with citizens. Giving them more time to interact as an elected official with citizens is a way of getting them to be involved and to support what it is you want to accomplish. Have them evaluate how well the organization is including citizens in the work of the organization. If it gets measured, it gets done, and elected officials are used to evaluating city workers and city performance, so this would be something that they would probably very much jump on board with. And I think convene an annual summit. Have the elected leadership invite those that are engaged in public work to come talk about it on an annual basis and have the opportunity to learn and share best practices. Of course, the structural changes are the easiest. The really hard work is figuring out how to bring citizens under the tent. Let me offer two examples from my days as city manager on how one might approach this. The first example is having citizens engaged in city operations, and the second is including citizens involved in a wicked problem with government and other stakeholders. When I was a city manager, we created something called the Citizen Financial Review Board to advise and make recommendations on capital and operating budget expenditures. Neighborhood associations appointed residents to serve on the CFRG committee. That reported to me. This group was not a typical rubber stamp group that so often is what is expected of citizens. They were given open access to information, and they were staffed by the Office of Management and Budget, the same folks who staffed me. Department heads were required to present and defend their budgets before them, just as they did with me. The CFRG was given the independence to make whatever recommendations they deemed appropriate, and I sent their recommendations along with mine to the City Commission. Before submitting their recommendations to me, they went to their respective neighborhood associations and had the opportunity to interact and gain feedback and input from residents of their neighborhood. Over time, the CFRG became the recognized expert on the city's budget. Today, hundreds of neighborhood residents have become experts on the city's finances. And as city manager, I had an extra set of eyes and ears looking at our finances and our service priorities, and they helped me make sure that I got it right. 2 points I'd like to make here. When I talk about citizen engagement, I'm talking more than about asking citizens to comment on public policies or to attend a forum or a dialogue on the city's proposed budget. What I am talking about is going a step further, involving citizens in naming the problem, framing how the problem affects them, being part of the deliberation discussing how to fix the problem, and then having a role in fixing the problem, an active participatory role. There's general acceptance these days of public-private partnerships. I'm talking about a citizen-city hall partnership. Second, I'm not talking about citizens becoming City Hall. The bureaucracy has a critical role to play in this partnership, as do citizens. Co-production is what I'm recommending. Another example, working on a wicked problems, comes from code enforcement. One of the challenges in most urban communities is how do you maintain the quality of life and how do you ensure that problems are eradicated before they become very serious ones. And code enforcement is often the challenge that many of us face. During a neighborhood walk with a group of citizens, they pointed out a problem that was continuing to grow in their neighborhood, and that was the number of vacant and abandoned properties that weren't boarded up, where the grass was overgrown, where there's trash and debris. And the city didn't do anything about it. On the walk were the housing inspectors, and so I asked, what's going on here? And they said they issue citations and these property owners refused to comply, and that we really had only an administrative fine, and if they didn't pay it, there was little else that we could do to force them to comply. So what we had here was a wicked problem. Residents were frustrated, they went to City Hall, and from their perspective, we did nothing about it. The staff was frustrated because they issued citations, couldn't force compliance, and so they're passing out hundreds of citations and nothing happens. This is a wicked problem. So what did we do? Just to cut to the chase, you obviously bring people together, you sit down and talk about how you want to resolve it, what are some of the elements, what are the collateral issues that have to be addressed as well, and we spent a lot of time, particularly up front, doing that. But we came up with some good ideas, the synergy of the public, of the stakeholders in the neighborhood, like the banks and city government. And in this case, we included most of the senior staff of the city as we were naming and framing and deliberating about the problem. And we were given assignments and responsibilities. In the end, we came up with what worked for us in that situation, and the resolution of that particular neighborhood's problem also provided an opportunity for a citywide resolution of a lot of the code compliance issues we face. So what were we able to do? First of all, we secured criminal sanctions for housing code violations, and that's where I took the lead to make sure that got done, and I worked with our city attorney's staff and others, elected officials, to make sure that we changed the law to allow that to happen. We also created a housing court, a court that would only hear code enforcement kinds of complaints and concerns. Another one where the city leadership took responsibility. But citizens took pictures and testified in the housing court on the impact of those vacant and abandoned properties on their neighborhoods. Once the first criminal sanctions were levied, we also found that particularly the property owners that were speculators and absentee landlords rushed to the table to ensure that they were not going to have criminal penalties and or go to jail. The first early cases of the recalcitrant violators went to jail. Not for a long time, but that was enough to bring people to the table. So we were able to bring citizens and property owners and city resources and other community resources together to talk about what do we do with those vacant and abandoned properties. The city made some resources available for homeowners to do repairs and upgrades. We also used federal funds for the larger rental properties, and collectively everybody got involved. Neighborhood residents were trained on the housing code. They then, as an association, would notify residents when they saw problems to see if they might be able to help. For some residents that had minor problems, they would do painting, minor home repairs, they would mow the lawn. For others, they would refer to community organizations and entities that provided those kinds of specialized services and programs. But what happened was we created a neighborhood. It wasn't just a single house here or single house there. People came together and people started working together, and everybody had a role, government and citizens. The end result was that we found more communities coming to us saying, We saw how that partnership worked, and we want a partnership, and here are some issues we have. And it really allowed us to begin to develop the processes and to realign ourselves consistent with the way citizens work, and not with the way bureaucracies have historically worked. For example, I'd like to talk about another neighborhood that came to us and said, look, we've got a problem with public safety. We've got illegal drug activity taking place. We need some help. I'm running out of time, I know, but what we did was say, okay, let's sit down and talk about it, let's name it, frame it, and let's deliberate. And the city agreed to add bike patrols, clear the trees and brush. There was a lighting program through our community development block grant that we created specifically for neighborhoods that had high rates of crime. They applied for the grant. But the key was the residents came up with the best solution of all. They glued plastic eggs onto the railing to make it inconvenient to sit. And guess what? When they couldn't sit down, when they were visible, they moved. And so there was a big community celebration around the ideas that came from the citizens themselves. Some of the problems that can be abated within a relatively short period of time, and others require years of work and commitment, like the code enforcement example. In each of the examples, there were short-term successes in addressing the problem at hand, and positive collateral effects that occurred as well. Sometimes short work will be on issues inside City Hall, and sometimes it will be dealing with wicked problems in the neighborhood. In closing, there are a few important things that I'd like you to remember. Shared work includes citizens and government, along with other community stakeholders, in naming, framing, deliberating, and acting together. Fixing wicked problems may often be a neighborhood or place-related issue, and sometimes in solving it in one neighborhood, you're able to solve it in other neighborhoods that have a similar problem. But other times, the solution will be different, and you have to be flexible enough to understand that there is not a cookie-cutter solution to neighborhood-based problems. Once the core symptoms have been identified, you need to herd out who's going to do what. It's easy with these complicated issues to lose track and to lose touch. Time frames, who's responsible for completing a given task, who is going to need to be at the table if the issue is going to be resolved, maintaining communications, meeting frequently, giving people updates, and just developing a regular process consistent, again, with the way citizens work. If your volunteers are working during the day, your meetings and activities are going to be early in the morning or later at night or on the weekends. And so as city staff, we have to be flexible enough to accommodate the schedules and the input from citizens in ways that are most meaningful for them and in ways they can do it. It's also important for all stakeholders to have a role in fixing the problem. It doesn't do us much good if we name and frame and deliberate and then the responsibilities to do something rest with a single institution or a single person. Everyone needs to do work if it's to be shared. And you must begin with the end in mind. That is, what does fixing the problem look like to the group? Not to me, to the group. Not to a single organization, to the group. That's shared work. Groups may define the end differently, and they may have different goals, even when they're dealing with a similar problem. And again, that's okay. Set short and long-term goals, and celebrate successes when they occur, including those that were indirectly the result of what you did, but were based on the foundations that you laid and the groundwork that you did. I've mentioned before, be flexible. The best laid plans of mice and men, off they go astray. Clearly that's going to happen. We have a lot more people engaged in making decisions about the work to be done. Recognize when fatigue sets in with the team, and develop strategies that will give them some short-term successes, and maybe it's a different project, and you come back to the more difficult, complicated one, so that people have a chance to rest, invest, and also to see that they can get something accomplished without getting too frustrated and walking away. Build stamina. My experience trying to achieve ways of engaging citizens in meaningful dialogue and public work taught me that hearing their voice and making them partners with government and fixing wicked problems made our communities stronger and more democratic. I believe our challenge and our opportunity rests with our ability to collaborate on a new set of values for public institutions and civic life. With that, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and ideas. I'd love to hear from you if something I said resonates with you. Have a wonderful conference and know that I miss you and hope to join you next time.